As Jane entered the hospital, she felt a sense of unease wash over her. The lights flickered, and the air felt thick with an unexplainable energy. She shook it off, chiding herself for being superstitious. After all, it was just another night shift as a cleaner. As she made her way down the eerily quiet hallways, she noticed a wheelchair that had moved from its usual spot. Her heart skipped a beat. Had she accidentally bumped it earlier and forgotten about it? She tried to push the thought out of her mind as she continued on her rounds, but the feeling of unease only intensified. Then she heard something, a faint whisper that she couldn't quite make out. Her grip on her cleaning cart tightened as she tried to locate the source of the sound. As she turned the corner, she saw a shadow move out of the corner of her eye. She froze, unsure of what to do next. It was in that moment that she knew something was wrong, something beyond explanation, something that couldn't be ignored. Jane took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves, but her heart was beating so fast she could feel it in her throat. She knew this was going to be a long and terrifying night. Jane's unease continued to grow as she walked through the hospital. She noticed that some of the doors that she had just cleaned were now slightly ajar, as if someone had opened them while she was in another room. She knew for a fact that she had closed them all properly. The flickering lights seemed to be following her, making her feel like something was watching her every move. She could hear strange noises, like whispers and creaking floorboards, coming from the empty rooms. Her heart was racing, and she was struggling to breathe. As she reached the end of the hallway, she heard a loud banging noise. She hesitated for a moment before slowly making her way towards the source of the sound. When she arrived, she saw that a metal cabinet had fallen over, and the contents were scattered across the floor. It was as if something had knocked it over intentionally. Jane tried to shake off the fear that was gripping her, telling herself that it was just her imagination. But deep down, she knew that something was wrong. She could feel it in the air. She tried to convince herself that it was just a draft or a trick of the light, but it was getting harder and harder to ignore the strange occurrences happening around her. She knew that something was there with her, and it was not friendly. Jane was on edge as she continued her rounds through the hospital. The feeling of being watched was constant, and she could feel her nerves fraying with each passing moment. As she entered one of the patient rooms, she noticed something odd. The bed was unmade, and the patient's belongings were scattered on the floor. She approached the bed and found that the patient was nowhere to be seen. Her heart racing, Jane knew that something was seriously wrong. She checked the rest of the room, but there was no sign of the patient. Suddenly, a door slammed shut down the hallway. Jane jumped, her nerves already shot from the strange occurrences that had happened earlier. She hesitated for a moment before deciding to investigate. She slowly made her way down the hallway, her heart beating out of her chest. As she approached the door, she could hear muffled whispers coming from the other side. She took a deep breath and pushed the door open. What she saw made her scream. The room was empty except for a single wheelchair in the center. It was rocking back and forth on its own, the sound of the creaking wheels filling the silence. Jane couldn't explain what was happening, but she knew that she had to get out of there. Jane ran as fast as she could, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was chasing her, something that she couldn't see. As she rounded a corner, she ran into a figure standing in the middle of the hallway. It was a man in a white lab coat, his face obscured by the shadow of his hood. Jane couldn't see his face, but she could feel his eyes piercing into her. The man beckoned her closer, and she knew that she should run in the opposite direction, but her legs wouldn't move. She took a step closer, her body moving on its own, and the man spoke. His voice was low and gravelly, sending shivers down Jane's spine. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice echoing through the empty hallway. Jane tried to speak, but no words came out. She could feel the fear overtaking her, and she knew that she was in danger. The man in the lab coat reached out and touched her arm, and Jane felt a jolt of electricity shoot through her body. In that moment, she knew that she had to get out of the hospital. She pulled away from the man and started running in the opposite direction. As she sprinted down the hallway, she could hear his laughter echoing behind her. Jane burst through the doors of the hospital, gasping for breath. She stumbled down the steps and out into the cold night air. Her heart was racing, and she could feel the adrenaline pumping through her veins. She looked back at the hospital, and in the distance, she could see the figure of the man in the lab coat standing in the doorway. He was watching her, his eyes glowing in the darkness. Jane knew that she had to get as far away from the hospital as possible. She started to run, her feet pounding on the pavement. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs ached, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. She knew that she would never feel safe until she put as much distance between herself and the hospital as possible. As she ran, Jane could feel the fear slowly dissipating, replaced by a feeling of empowerment. She'd have faced her fears and come out the other side. She had survived the night shift at the hospital, and she knew that she would never be the same again. As she turned a corner and disappeared into the night, Jane knew that she would never forget the horrors she had experienced. But she also knew that she had the strength to face anything that came her way. After her harrowing experience at the hospital, Jane never returned to work the night shift. She resigned from her job, and it took her months to recover from the trauma. She underwent therapy to help her cope with the memories of the horrors she had witnessed. Despite the difficulties, she emerged stronger and more resilient than ever before. She also made a promise to herself to always trust her instincts and listen to her gut feelings.